is being recorded, so if you need to leave at any point, or it's going to be recorded up on YouTube. Okay, so let's get started. So this gentleman here, Rishi Sunak, he has been Chancellor of the Exchequer since the 13th of February 2020. And I guess he, like everyone else, would never have thought we'd be in this position where 7 or 8 weeks later, the government are having to support businesses throughout the UK by paying 80% of their wages. So the presentation today is really to look at the job retention scheme, which was announced last week. And we're going to go through this in quite a lot of detail. Just to let you know, there is we have invited questions before the webinar, and that will be towards the end. Can I just ask you, if you do have any questions that come up during the webinar, just hold them from the end, because there is a chat box or a Q&A panel as well. You can use either format, so we're going to build in a little bit of time to answer any live questions that come up in the webinar. So the presenters today, myself, so I'm a director of One Accounting here in Edinburgh, but an accountant all of my life. We've been running One Accounting for around about 13 years now. We work with SMEs across Scotland and throughout the UK. And well, I'll hand over to Ian in a second. Ian's been a very busy guy. I've known him for a few years, and I don't want to embarrass him, but Ian is the go-to guy in Edinburgh and Scotland for any HR, legal, contractual advice. Really great guy to know, so I'm delighted that we've got him on the webinar today. Quick agenda, we're just going to run through what the job retention scheme is, how to claim, which business is going to be eligible, the amounts that can be claimed, a lot of questions about the tasks that what can a furloughed worker do. We're going to just have some quick examples on the calculation, nothing too detailed there. Had some questions about how the PAYE and NIC and pension work with a furloughed worker. The big question that everyone seems to be asking is, can a director be furloughed and make a claim? And then we'll have a Q&A at the end where we'll answer some of the questions that have been submitted. So let's see if I can hand over to Ian, and he can start his presentation.
Great, let's try and make the tech.
Over to you, Ian.
Great, lovely. Okay, so I am just going to share my screen with everybody. By the power of this amazing technology. I bet we all wish we had shares in Zoom right now. So hopefully you can all see a picture of Grey Friars Bobby with a mask on. Doing a bit of shielding there. So good morning, everybody. Delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you about the job retention scheme. And Chris is right. I'm extraordinarily busy at the moment, helping lots and lots of local businesses. And both existing clients and new ones as well. And I knew I've done HR for 30 years, and I knew if I hung around long enough, eventually I'd become popular. And finally that's happened. And over the last 3 weeks, we've gone through phases of looking at job losses and people reducing their hours and reducing their pay. And then a week last Friday, the Chancellor made the very welcome announcement of furloughing, a word I don't think we'd ever heard before. And the job retention scheme. And we spent most of last week then trying to work out what the 4 sentences on the government website actually meant as businesses were planning the furloughing of their workers. And then last Thursday evening, they dropped the job retention scheme on the government website. And now we have a lot more detail. So what I'm going to do over the next 20 minutes is I'm going to talk you through the detail that we now have and how you can apply it within your business. So first of all, eligibility. We know that to be eligible as a business, you have to have a PAYE scheme, and that has to have been in place since the 28th of February 2020. We also know that to be an employee who's eligible under the scheme, you need to be paid through PAYE. We know that this applies to all sectors except the public sector. So I would imagine everybody listening to this webinar is covered. It doesn't cover projects funded by public money with caveats. If there are any charities on this call, maybe just get in touch with me separately, because this is quite a complex area that we're trying to unpick, but I'll not spend time on it now. The employee must have stopped working in order to avoid redundancy. And I'll come on to this in a little bit more detail later on, but they must have stopped working. And they must agree to be furloughed. So there's lots of people now saying, oh, I furloughed someone last week, but I didn't get agreement. Is that valid? The answer is no, it's not. It has to be a two-way street. It has to be agreed by the employee. That needs to be in writing. Their acceptance by email in these circumstances, of course, is absolutely fine. Or you might want to think about using DocuSign or Signable or something like that. It covers all contract types. So full-time, part-time, fixed term, 0 hours, casual, bank, anybody who is paid through PAYE. If there are any recruitment agencies in the room, then this covers your agency workers as well, but it does not cover the self-employed. There's a separate scheme for the self-employed, which we'll have a little look at later on. It covers anyone made redundant since the 28th of February if they are rehired by their employer. So if you made anyone redundant from the 29th of February, and by the way, I don't think the government realised this was a leap year, but if you did that, you have the choice whether to rehire them and immediately furlough them from that date that they were made redundant or not, as long as that date was after the 28th of February. And the reason for the redundancy was the COVID-19 pandemic. It does not apply, furloughing, the scheme does not apply to anyone hired after the 28th of February. So if you no longer need those people, you would need to make them redundant. They cannot be furloughed. And it does not apply to anyone on unpaid leave unless they were placed on unpaid leave after the 28th of February this year. So you furlough someone, how do you get your money back? Well, we know that HMRC are setting up an online portal and that they intend that to be in place by the middle of April. We don't have a date at the moment. What we anticipate is that when they put the portal up, there will be more information with it. So we might get further guidance, which may add to everything I'm telling you today, or I guess conceivably might even change some of it, because this thing is fast moving and definitely a moving feast. They have said that payments will be made from the end of April. I think the word from is interesting, but let's work on the basis that you're going to get your money at the end of April. And what we do know is it is a grant, so there is no requirement to pay it back. This is money coming to you in order to pay wages for people that otherwise would be made redundant. Wages does not include fees, commission, and bonus, rather controversially for those employees whose salary is topped up significantly by such things, but it does not include that. And they've said they're going to issue more guidance on how employers should calculate national insurance and minimum auto-enrolment pension contributions. You can claim once every 3 weeks. We don't know if you can claim for more than 3 weeks, but you can claim every 3 weeks under the scheme. To do so, you will need to have your EPAYE reference number, the number of employees being furloughed, the claim period, so the start and the end date, and the start date can be no earlier for anyone that you hadn't made redundant previously. It can be no earlier than the date that you agree in writing with that employee to furlough. So if you agree with them today, then today is the date that you would put in the portal. You will put in the amount claimed per minimum length of 3 weeks. That's the minimum period you can furlough someone, and your bank details, because it's you, the employer, that the money will come to, and your contact details. You will need to calculate the amount you are claiming, and I suspect Chris will say a little bit more on this, and HMRC will retain the right to retrospectively audit all aspects of your claim. That is the wording that they are using. So my strong advice to you as a professional advisor is do not try and find ways around this, because if, and it may be a small if, but if they come calling, the consequences for your business could be catastrophic. And it would be tragic to go through all of this and then lose your business on a technicality. So do I have to pay the wages first? This is one that's open to interpretation at the moment. We know that you should make the claim in accordance with the actual payroll amounts at the point at which you run your payroll or in advance of an imminent payroll, because that's the wording that the scheme has. So for weekly paid, you definitely need to keep paying them. For fortnightly paid, you definitely need to keep paying them. For people due to be paid at the end of April, you might be able to work your way through that depending on when the money comes through. What we're doing in the furlough letters that we're providing for clients is we're getting agreement for employees that they won't be paid until the employer gets paid by HMRC. Obviously, if HMRC tighten the rules up on that, we might need to step back on that, but that's what we're doing at the moment, and in effect, therefore, getting the employee's agreement to that. So, what is reimbursed? So it's 80% of usual wage costs, subject to usual deductions. It's capped at £2,500, plus national insurance, and plus the minimum statutory auto-enrolment pension contribution for that 80%. You can use the scheme anytime during the 3 months of the scheme. So the scheme runs March, April, and May. So you could furlough someone, for example, in the middle of April or the middle or early May, but they have to be furloughed for 3 weeks. And as I said, it's only from the date that the employee is furloughed. And as I said, the minimum period is 3 calendar weeks. You can, if you wish, top pay up to 100%, and many are where cash flow allows. And if cash flow does allow, that's a great thing to do, because the way you treat your employees now in this difficult time will be reflected in their loyalty and their performance for years to come. If you do top it up to 100%, then that 20% is not reclaimable from HMRC under the scheme. There may be hospitality businesses in the room who will have lots of staff who are on 0 hours or very variable pay. So the scheme has helpfully given us a methodology for calculating what should be put into the portal, and it's as follows. If they've been engaged for 12 months prior to the claim, it is the higher of the same month's earnings for the previous year, or the average monthly earnings from the 2019-20 tax year. If they've been employed for less than a year, then it's the average of monthly earnings since they started work. And finally, if they only started in February, then you use their pro rata earnings so far. So that's variable pay. Now, a big question we're being asked is, what work can the employee do whilst furloughed? And the answer, I'm afraid, is really simple: none. They cannot do any work that provides services to the employer or generates revenue. And it's hard to think of something that somebody does as an employee that isn't providing services to you as the employer or helps you to generate revenue. So there is a blanket ban on doing work whilst furloughed, with one exception. So they can do volunteer work elsewhere. That's not the exception, but they can do volunteer work elsewhere, but not for you. You can't furlough them and then get them to volunteer to work for you. But they can do training, as long as it doesn't provide services to or generate income for your organisation. So they can do training, which I think is a very good thing for the scheme. Keeps people's brains ticking over and helps you to be fast out the blocks when we get back to work, as we, of course, will. If they do online training courses and their salary is below the national minimum wage due to furlough, then you must top that up. Let me explain what that means. Say, for example, purely to illustrate this point, the minimum wage was £10. Someone's furloughed, you don't top up the 20%, so their hourly rate drops to £8. However, their contractual hours are unchanged. This means that technically, whilst furloughed, they are receiving less than the national minimum wage. However, because they're not working, that is allowable by the government under the scheme. If, however, they do online training courses, they will be working, and for those hours, so say they did 2 hours of online training, for those 2 hours, you would need to top their pay up, back up to the national minimum wage. So it only applies to national minimum wage. If you have people who already have a second employer, then that carries on unless they're furloughed by that second employer. The scheme is not intended to allow people to be furloughed by you, reimbursed for 80% of their pay by the HMRC, and then go off and get a second job where they're endangering public health and they're getting more pay than they would have done ordinarily. So the line that we're taking is people cannot go and get a second job. If they have a second job already permitted by you, then that, of course, is fine. So who do you choose to furlough? So if you're furloughing everybody, and in fact mothballing the business, that's easy. But if it's not all employees, then equality and discrimination laws apply in the usual way. So think, if you were doing redundancy selection, how would you be thinking about why it's Jimmy and not Johnny? How would you ensure that, would you look at performance records, for example, appraisal discussions? What you would have to safeguard is that you weren't picking someone of one protected characteristic over another. So, ethnic origin or gender or something like that. We do think, however, that it's okay to prioritise vulnerable workers. So, for example, the over 70s, you might prioritise them. And in normal times, that would be age discrimination. Right now, you're prioritising a vulnerable worker, which is a good thing to do. An employee can refuse to be furloughed. And that's implicit, of course, when I say that you need agreement. They can refuse. However, this is a mechanism to avoid redundancies. So you would make them aware that if they don't agree, then you would need to look at redundancies. In reality, who's likely to say, I don't want to sit at home and do no work for 80% of my pay, or even 100%? But that's the technical position. There is nothing yet in the guidelines, there is nothing which says you cannot rotate people in 3-week minimum blocks. So if you're keeping the business going, and you've maybe got 2 people that do the same job, you could rotate them in 3-week minimum blocks as things stand, and that might help your business. Sickness and annual leave. So the scheme is very, very clear on this. If you have someone who is currently on sick leave because of COVID-19, or is self-isolating because of COVID-19, and they're currently getting SSP, they cannot be furloughed until after that period. You can't take them off the sick and put them on furlough. They have to finish the sickness or self-isolation first, which is harsh on the employee who's maybe getting £94.25 a week rather than 80% of their pay, but the scheme is very clear on that. What it does say, however, is that employees who are shielding in line with public health guidance can be furloughed now. Annual leave continues to accrue during the period of furlough. What is good news is that at the weekend, the government announced that statutory annual leave, so that's the 28 days, can be carried forward over across the next 2 leave years. So the risk that we were seeing on Friday after the scheme was announced, that you might have people come back halfway through the calendar year with a full year's leave entitlement still to take, that's been removed. So that's good news. So family leave, so maternity leave, etc. The rules are pretty much unchanged. So as of now, after birth, mother must take at least 2 weeks off work, or 4 weeks if she works in a factory or workshop. If she's eligible for statutory maternity pay or maternity allowance, the usual rules apply. Good news is if you offer enhanced contractual maternity pay, you can claim this back from HMRC under the Job Retention Scheme. And the same principles apply for contractual adoption, paternity or shared parental pay schemes, should you have them. Most SMEs, of course, don't. The guidance does not prohibit women on maternity leave agreeing to return to work early and then being furloughed. They'd have to give their 8 weeks notice, or electing to change to shared parental leave and then being furloughed. Some other bits and bobs that we've gleaned from the scheme. So where employees have more than one employer, they can be furloughed by each employer for each job. When the scheme ends, the employer decides whether the employer returns to work or is redundant because you no longer have work for them. If that's the case, then you would still need to follow a fair and legally compliant redundancy process, just as if they had been at work. All employment law rights continue during furlough. So a question I've been asked a few times is it okay to contact people while they're furloughed? And the answer is absolutely yes, you should do, because your duty of care to them continues during that period. They are still your employees. Employees will continue to pay their own auto-enrollment pension contributions unless they opt out. You cannot suggest this to them. That would be a breach of the pension regulator's rules. but if they want to do so, then they can. And the reimbursement is included as income in the employee's calculation of taxable profits for income tax and corporation tax, deducting employment costs as normal. I'm sure Chris will be able to give more guidance on that. So that's the job retention scheme. Now, last Thursday, the Chancellor also announced the scheme to help the self-employed. We've not got a lot of detail, but I'm going to share what we've got with you. And I would anticipate that the Whitehall machine is working incredibly hard to bring the detail out as soon as they can. And if the job retention scheme is anything to go by, I would expect that to be this week, but that's not in my control. So they've introduced a new self-employed income support scheme that will pay the self-employed a taxable grant worth 80% of average monthly income, capped at £2,500. This will be calculated by taking the average of income over the last 3 years. Unlike employees, self-employed people don't have to furlough themselves. I know we're going to come on to directors separately, so this is the genuinely self-employed. So they can keep working. It's only open to anyone with trading profits, so not turnover, but profits of up to 50%. And it's only open to those who make the majority of their income from self-employment. So if you've got an employee who's got a side gig as self-employed, they're not eligible to claim under this scheme, but the job retention scheme does apply to them. It's only open to those who've submitted a tax return for 2019. HMRC don't call us, we'll call you. And so watch out for scammers. And it's going to be running for 3 months, but is unlikely to be running up until the end of June, so presents a significant cash flow challenge for the self-employed. So there's an overview of the two schemes. You have there an URL for our very frequently updated FAQs, so please feel free to bookmark that. If you're not linked in with me, please do. As Chris knows, I put out a lot of content at the moment to help people with this situation, so I'll be happy to have you see that. And if I can help in any way beyond the Q&A, then of course, please just drop me an email. I'm happy to see how we can help. And I'm now going to hand back to Chris.
That's great, Ian. Thank you very much for that. Just while I'm lining up my screen here, if there are people on the call that aren't clients of the HR department, is there any way you can help over the short term, Ian?
Yes, we can, Chris. So in peacetime, we work with businesses on a 1-year insured, retained basis. And we're doing contracts and handbooks and disciplines and absence and all the rest of it. What we've put together for this situation is an emergency 3-month support package. So we will provide unlimited advice, support, guidance, and documentation on all the workforce implications of COVID-19 for 3 months for one single fee, which is very reasonable, I'm told. So if anyone would like to find out more, then happy to have a chat.
That's great. So yeah, your email address, your contact details will appear at the end of the presentation. And what we're hoping to do is just package the slides up into a PDF and send those out as well. And this webinar has also been recorded, so we'll put up on YouTube. So yeah, plenty of opportunities to get Ian's details. Right, let's move on. Okay, so in terms of the maximum grants, let's just look at this. So the maximum grant, as Ian's just said, is the lower of 80% of an employee's regular wage and $2,500 per month. So I got the calculator out and worked out what the maximum salary would be to enable an employee to receive $2,500. And you can see it on the screen there. So any employee with a base salary of exactly $37,500 a year, which is $3,125 a month, will receive the maximum grant of $2,500. So if you have employees of earning less than the $37,500, then their grant is, in cash terms, is going to be less than $2,500. If you have employees that are earning more than that figure, then $2,500 is the maximum that they're going to be able to claim. In terms of employers' national insurance and pension, so the good news is that obviously employers would have to pay, the actual figure is 13.8% national insurance, and also employers' auto enrollment contributions of around about 3%. These can be reclaimed as well. as part of this scheme. But as Ian says, importantly, that fees, commissions, and bonuses cannot be included. So it's just purely salary that you're able to submit a grant claim for. What about PAYE and employees NIC? Well, the grant, it's taxable earnings. So the employee has to pay both PAYE and national insurance as normal from their furloughed salary. And if they're auto-enrolled for pension, then in normal circumstances, then the employee would have to carry on paying their employees' pension contributions. But with this, the employee has the option to opt out. But one word of advice is you've got to be very careful with employees. You as the employer cannot give any advice to the employee to say it might be a good idea to opt out of the auto-enrollment pension now to basically to save yourself some money. So just be careful on that. And if needs be, take the advice of an independent financial advisor for that. Okay, we'll come to an example. There's quite a lot of text on this screen, so hopefully you can see this okay. So let's look at an individual, Mr. A, that is receiving a salary of $24,000 a month. And to keep things simple, I've said that this person is opting out of auto-enrollment. So the employer, X Limited, has decided to furlough the employee. So at the moment, in the normal circumstances, then the employee is receiving net pay of £1,655 after PAYE and national insurance. Okay, so the available grant for the employer that they can claim, so it's the lower of these two figures. So you need to get the calculator out here. So it's the lower of 80% of 2,000, which is 1,600, and 2,500. So you're comparing 1,600 with 2,500, therefore 1,600 is the lower amount. So in this case, the employer, the grant that they can claim from HMRC is 1,600, which is 80% of the salary, plus the employer's national insurance to equal £1,722. If they were auto-enrolled, then they would also be able to claim the employer's contribution as well. So on this, in the bottom point there, if the employer was making up the additional 20%, so as Ian said before, there's no requirement to top up an employee's salary, but if you wanted to, then effectively the maximum cash that the employer would need there is £455 a month, which is a mixture of salary and employer's national insurance as well. Second example is for somebody more on variable hours. So this is a business that employs a waitress, Mrs. A, and she's on £9 an hour. The hours, as a lot of hospitality staff do, their hours vary from month to month. This individual has worked for the employer for 2 years. And like all hospitality and cafe businesses, etc., pubs, restaurants, the government ordered them to close. So Mrs. A has been furloughed. So we're just going to compare two figures here. So what we need to look at is look at the month's earnings from the previous year, from 2019, or look at the average monthly earnings from the 2019-20 tax year. So that's actually quite a complicated thing. So you would need to look through payroll reports. Your accountant will be able to help you here. But it's really just looking at the total pay for the year and working out the average for each month. So in my example, the average pay for this 19-20 tax year is $1,550. Mrs. A's gross pay for April 2019 was $1,620. So we look at the higher of those two figures. So hopefully that's given you a good example of what you need to compare there. So in my example here, the maximum grant is 80% of the 1,620. So it's actually what she was paid a year ago. So this is designed to be fair to people that just have a variable workload. Okay. The most frequent question we've been asked, it's a bit sad, but at the weekends I go into accountants' chat rooms and WhatsApp talks, and this is the most frequent question amongst accountants and business owners. Well, can I furlough myself? So can I furlough myself as a director and therefore claim back 80% of my salary? Now, in a lot of cases, directors are just paying themselves the national insurance minimum, which for the current tax year is £719 a year. There are other directors that pay themselves higher than that figure. But yeah, to all intents and purposes, the majority, probably 80 to 90% of the people on this call that are directors will be paying themselves that value. And then I've just put in italics at the bottom some of the questions that people have submitted that are on the call here. So you can see this is asking the same question in a few different ways as well. Okay, so let's look at this. So I looked for a bit of guidance here. So I looked on Twitter. Many people will know Martin Lewis. I think he's on ITV, and he has a very famous website called Martin's Money Tips, I believe. So Martin Lewis seems to be the voice of the people when it comes down to finances. So Martin Lewis thinks it's okay. So Martin Lewis tweeted on the 27th, confirmed self-employed limited company directors can be furloughed as employees on their PAYE element, even if they're the sole employee. And the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, has also said it's okay. And I think Ian said to me just before we start the call that the Institute of Directors have said it's okay. But as accountants, what we need to rely on is fact rather than opinion. So if you go to the .gov website, gov.uk, which is the source of all information, it's just tumbleweeds. So there's actually no guidance there to business owners, directors, whether they can actually furlough themselves. So we'll give you our view on this. Ian, if you want to chip in at any point in time, I think you can unmute yourself and join in. So can I furlough myself? So whilst furloughed, you were only allowed to carry out the duties of a director. There's a link to a Companies House blog post there which lists out duties of a director. So we'll not look at those now, but it's basically you can take care of the company's finances. For example, you would be able to submit accounts to Companies House. You would be able to submit an annual confirmation statement, but they're very brief. But it's important to state there that when these duties were put up, furloughing hadn't even been thought of. So the guidelines weren't issued with furloughing in mind. So they're open to interpretation. So our view. Okay, so a few things to think about here. So the portal to make the claims wouldn't be live until at least the end of April. So even if you were to furlough yourself today, you wouldn't be able to make a claim for another month, by which time we think hopefully will definitely be more guidance available with that. So what we are doing with our clients, so we've got a mixture of clients and non-clients on the call. So if you're a one accounting client, and it's a very simple question, we would ask you as the director whether you think you've met the conditions to make a claim, and if so, we can help you to do that. One thing to ask yourself, so for those of you that are on the national insurance minimum of £719 a month, 80% of that is £575. If this scheme is in operation for say 3 months, it may be more, then what's that? That's about £1,600 or £1,700 to basically not be able to work in your business. So you might want to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is it worth £1,700 to actually not be able to work in your business is one question. Here's my view on this. Okay, so this isn't advice, it's just my view on this. So, Ian's going to chip in if he thinks I'm saying something wrong here. It's possible to furlough a director, so perhaps when you've been told to close by the government, i.e. you're a pub or restaurant, shop in the hospitality business, you're not making any sales. For example, if you're a contractor that is maybe an engineer working on a construction site and you physically cannot work, and possibly whereas there is more than one director. So possibly one director can be furloughed if there are 2 directors, and then the other director carries on working. So there's some possibilities there.
I'll chip in, Chris, not to correct you, because I think I agree with every word you've just said.
Yep.
I think it's absolutely spot on. I think the risk isn't worth taking. I'm confident that there will be more guidance. Whenever there's been heat and noise around a particular topic, the government has responded, which is why I'm sure they will now respond on the other group that currently aren't covered, the sole directors of a limited company. This group, but we've certainly had a number of clients who have multiple directors and are furloughing some of them, but not all, and then looking at potentially rotating them through the furlough period to make it fair.
Great. Okay, that's useful. And again, it's not possible to furlough a director, in my view, when you're still making sales and raising invoices. For example, if you're fulfilling orders through a web shop or providing business services. You have employees working who have not been furloughed. So yeah, I don't think it's possible to have 2 employees continue working for the business and you're saying you're furloughed and not working in it and giving them instructions. I don't think that's possible. Or you're dealing with suppliers or customers.
Yeah,
And
I have had that where a director thought they could sit at home on no pay and get their staff to do all the work.
yeah.
I did suggest, never mind the technical point, that that might not be the best for employee engagement moving forwards.
Sure, yeah, and just one thing to add, myself and my team here at One Accounting, so we're dealing with the HMRC all day long, all year long, and at some point there will be audits on this. When all this dreadful COVID-19 is over, the government is going to be handing out billions of pounds of grants, and yeah, you can bet your bottom dollar they will be auditing this and just making sure that people haven't bent the rules. So it might sound like a good idea now, but just bear in mind there might be a knock on the door in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years time when it's HMRC and they're asking to audit your job retention scheme. So just bear that in mind. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. It's about 25 to. We're going to finish at 5 to 12. Not going to go on any longer than this. So we're going to run through some questions that we've been asked in advance of this. Ian, by all means, chip in if you want to comment. And I've also had a couple of emails on my phone while the presentation's been going on as well. So I'll endeavour to answer those. So question, will HMRC ask for evidence to demonstrate that COVID-19 has impacted the revenue and the cash flow? So do you need to illustrate that your business needs the money and is poorly? The answer is no. So the Chancellor's actually said that this scheme is there to benefit any employer in the company, sorry, any employer in the country, large and small. So it's not means tested. Every business can claim. I've heard a couple of varying questions as to work that furloughed staff can complete from absolutely zero to basic admin. So I've actually pasted in the response here from the gov.uk website and highlighted there. So when on furlough, an employee cannot undertake work for or on behalf of the organisation. So with that, unfortunately, it's a no. It's in terms of the options, it's absolutely zero is the answer there.
Apart from training.
Apart from training.
Yeah.
Good point, Ian. Yep, there's a question on training just coming up in a second. Okay, some employees will move to another payroll in the same group after the 20th of February. Will they still be eligible? Well, the answer is no. This is actually a really good question, and I know the persons that submitted this, and I will be in touch with them because I understand the issue here. So the important thing is it's no. So the grant, when that can be submitted, when the portal's up and running, you need to put in your employee's PAYE reference number. So if you've paid if you've got two companies and you've paid employees under company A, then you need to make the claim under company A, if you see what I mean. If there's people that have been potentially have moved from company A to company B after the 20th of February, then you wouldn't be able to claim for company B. But I think we might be able to look at that, whether it's possible to transfer them back to company A, would need to look. But it's a good question. We'll take that up separately with the person that's asked that question. If we have staff on furlough, would they be allowed to provide free of charge pro bono evaluation and research support to local charities if they were doing it via their work emails and work Zoom accounts? So Ian, my view on this is yes, they can take part in volunteer work or training as long as they're not promoting or generating revenue for that organization. Would you say that's correct? I
would. So they definitely can volunteer. So
yep.
That's what's described there as volunteering. I'd question why they would need to do it through their work accounts.
Yeah.
Anyone can set up a free email and anyone can set up a free Zoom.
Yeah.
That's probably better. It creates no linkage whatsoever with the business and removes any dubiety on audit as to whether it was providing services to the employer, for example, through some sort of CSR scheme or something. So yeah, I'd suggest they do it through their personal stuff, but it's absolutely fine.
Great advice. Yeah, and Zoom, as most people know, it's a free service. I think you can get 40 minutes for free on a call, in some cases longer. So yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Okay, can employees work for someone else and still receive this benefit? Well, yes. Ian's covered this earlier. If your employer is more than one employer, they can be furloughed for each job.
Yeah, so what's clear is that's absolutely right. The line that we're taking, however, is you can't then go and pick up another job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you couldn't have a full-time job, be furloughed, and then get a part-time job somewhere else.
Correct. But if you had one already, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Okay, if you take a dividend, how can that be factored into a furlough situation? Well, unfortunately, the answer at the moment is you cannot. So dividends are excluded from the job retention grant, unfortunately. So yeah, there's been a lot in the press. So directors at the moment are the people that cannot benefit through this. Have you got any thoughts on this, Ian?
It seems to be the gaping gap. So when the job retention scheme was released, there was a lot of heat and noise, understandably, from the self-employed, and the government listened and responded. And I think in all of this, it's important to remember that this is not just a Conservative government. They are working very closely with the opposition parties, but also the FSB and the TUC. So I think it's inconceivable that they're not hearing the noise that there now is, and that there won't be some response. I'm sure there will be.
Yeah. Okay, what are the timescales to access the government's loan scheme? So I've actually pasted some bits and bobs in here. So yeah, the online service to claim isn't available yet. Basically, HMRC are building a brand new IT system, and they're working day and night to do this, and they expect it to be available by the end of April. So in terms of how it works, so Ian's just covered this, but just to repeat that, you can make one claim every 3 weeks, but they can be backdated until the 1st of March. So if you are a business that's had people on furlough even for a couple of weeks in March, when the portal goes live at the end of April, you know, in theory, you would have had furloughed workers for 6 weeks. So the way that we're interpreting that is that you can make one claim. The first claim will cover that 6-week period. And then after that, it's every 3 weeks. And in terms of actually getting paid, so it's still your responsibility as the employer to pay your staff, pay your team, but HMRC are going to deposit money back into your company bank account. So there will be a validation process as part of this. You need to give HMRC bank details, but I'm sure there'll be some sort of validation on the bank account to do that. Something that Ian covered as well, in terms of the timing of all of this. So yeah, you make your claim in accordance with actual payroll amounts at the point which you run your payroll, or in advance of an imminent payroll. So on that, Ian, I'm thinking if you know you're going to have furloughed workers and you need to pay wages in a week's time, then we think it's going to be okay to submit the claim at that point.
Yeah, we think so.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. This is one of the, like lots of this, we are interpreting the information that we have as professional advisors using our background knowledge, in my case of employment law and yours of accounting, Chris. So I think everything I advised on last week when there was only 4 sentences to advise on, and I made a lot of commercial judgments, and then went to bed very nervously on Thursday night. I was relieved when I woke up, and I think we were probably about 95% right. So hopefully that hit rate will continue. But there's definitely some interpretation going on at the moment, which is why I think, you know, real word of caution. There's a lot of fake news out there about what this all means. Martin Lewis has been guilty of that from our perspective, as useful as he is in normal times. So yeah, just check things out and keep regularly in touch with your professional advisors, because they've got their finger on the pulse.
Absolutely, thanks. Yep. So next one, do one accounting administer the payments? So no is the answer. So at the moment, there's no guidance from HMRC as to whether accountants, so we're tax agents, so we're authorised on behalf of our clients to communicate with HMRC, can actually make the grant claim on their behalf. So what actually happens, so you as the employer still need to pay your employee, even if it's the 80% furlough, you need to physically pay those amounts to your team, and then HMRC are going to deposit money into your business bank account. So if you think about it, it's easier for HMRC to pay the employer one amount, rather than, say you've got 5 employees, rather than HMRC have to pay 5 employees. So yeah, so you as the employer pay the worker, and then you claim money back. And we think, yes, we should be able to help submit the claim. At some point when the claim portal goes live, there will be a disclaimer on there along the lines of, you know, I confirm that this claim is genuine, and I may be liable to, well, I guess the word might be prosecution if found to be making a false claim. They normally make quite heavy statements when you're signing a disclaimer, for example, on a tax return. Okay. Can the firm pay for training during furlough? So yeah, a similar thing to what we had before. So yes, if you want to train your staff, teach them new skills, then yes, you can pay for online training courses. But importantly, this is quite a small technical thing. You need to pay that worker the national minimum wage for training hours, even if it's more than 80%. So for example, in my example of the waitress on £9 an hour, if we wanted her to undertake some training on operating a till system, she could do that. The business could pay for that training course, but she would have to be paid, well, basically £9 an hour rather than £7.20 an hour, which would be the 80% furloughed wages for that. Okay, this one I've left the answer blank because I'm going to hand over to Ian. What happens if post-furlough you need to make someone redundant? Over to you, Ian.
Okay, so it's no different from if you needed to make somebody redundant today. You would think about whether they've got more or less than 2 years service, and you would follow an appropriate process for doing so, with all the stuff that makes it legal, which is just peacetime stuff, really. So yeah, you can do it. I've had clients say to me, can we put in the letter, the furlough agreement, can we put in that we reserve the right to make you redundant? And I've said, no, you don't put that in the letter because you've got that right at any time anyway, as the employer. So yeah, it's normal rules apply would be the easiest way. There's nothing special been released in terms of furlough.
Great, okay. Right, I'm just going to read a question that's come in by email while we've been presenting as well. Ian, you might want to comment on this as well. We are in a position that due to the COVID-19, we have to completely stop work and are now getting no cash flow through our bank at the moment. We heavily rely on cash flow to pay our staff on a week-by-week basis. I've looked into loans and getting nowhere. The government is suggesting we pay our staff 80% of the wages and then I claim it back at the end of April, but I do not have the funds to pay 80% of their wages. What can I do?
Okay.
So this is a very real problem. I mean, just to emphasize, there are two ways that the government are giving businesses money. So number one is the job retention grant that we're looking at here. The second one is actually through non-domestic rate support. It all depends if the business is registered for non-domestic rates. So this is if you've got an office or premises where you're actually registered for non-domestic rates. You don't necessarily have to be paying them because if you're in a small office, you'll get 100% discount. In that circumstance, you should be eligible for a grant of 10,000. If you're bigger, and it depends on the sector, hospitality businesses can actually claim up to 25,000. That's not really the subject of this webinar, but that's the second way that the government are actually putting money into your business bank account. The other ways are just all on deferment. So you can defer payment of VAT. That's a given. It's some way into the future, but you can defer self-assessment tax payments, which are due at the end of July as well. In terms of PAYE, so what you can do is set up a time to pay agreement with HMRC for your monthly PAYE, which is due on the 22nd of each month. So obviously we're now at the 31st, so that has gone. But yeah, we've had clients that have rung up and HMRC have just given them time to pay with no problem at all, and almost give them sort of 2 or 3 month deferment. So there are ways of just deferring revenue. But yeah, Ian, how would you address this? So actually no money at the moment to pay the wages.
Yeah, so the guidelines say you should make the claim in accordance with actual payroll amounts. I think that word's important. At the point at which you run your payroll or in advance of an imminent payroll. So it doesn't explicitly say that you, at the moment, that you need to have actually then passed that money to the employee into their bank account. It says that you need to have actual payroll amounts. So clearly you have to run the payroll. If you can then agree with your employee as a condition of being furloughed, that you will not pay them until you are reimbursed by HMRC, and that if HMRC subsequently rule that by doing so, that makes them ineligible for the scheme, and therefore they won't be furloughed after all, then you cover all bases and can keep yourself afloat. So that's some of the clever wording that we're putting into letters at the moment to try and cover it. So do that. The other thing to be aware of, a lot of weekly paid people are 0 hours, so they're paid on their variable hours. You don't have to furlough anyone, and be aware for 0 hours, if you do furlough them, and there are good reasons why you might want to, but if you do furlough them, they will accrue annual leave during the period of furlough, which from the 6th of April will be calculated retrospectively over the last 52 weeks, because the rules are changing from the 6th of April. So they'll accrue that, and that will be a cost on your business when we all get back to normal. The alternative, if you don't want to accrue that liability, is to say to them, you're 0 hours, I don't have any hours for you at the moment because our doors are shut, and I'll be in touch when this is all over. They are then free to go and get work elsewhere, of course, and you are not incurring that annual leave cost liability later on. So it's an option, might be good or bad reasons whether you do that. Just be aware, if you have people who are called 0 hours but aren't really, because actually use them week in, week out, then they might come back on you against that argument. But there's some thoughts about how to weave your way through it.
Great. Okay, thanks. Right, there's a couple of questions that have come in live. So actually, Neil has answered these to the individuals, and so this is a question coming in. We took somebody on the 3rd of March. We could do with furloughing him, but obviously he wasn't with us on the 20th of February. I've read a fair bit of coverage in the press this morning about people caught in similar scenarios. Have you heard anything about the likelihood of this changing? So yeah, employee taken on the 3rd of March, but they were not an employee at the 20th of February. What are your thoughts, Ian?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, I wasn't expecting that to see that in the guidelines, to be honest. But it's very clear. The guidelines are very clear. You cannot furlough someone who started after the 28th of February. So I haven't heard any rumours of that changing, but listen, I don't have the ear of the Treasury, so it might change. But no, I've not heard any whispers on that.
Yep. Okay. I think this might have been answered. If I furlough my employees, must I pay them as normal, or can I wait until the HMRC is up and running and backdate the payments? So this is similar, I think, to not actually having the money able to pay the wages. So I think the answer to that is yes. Yep. So you can wait until you've got the money from HMRC.
Unless they put more guidance out, which proves us wrong.
Yeah.
And they have said they're going to put some more guidance out, so it's possible.
Yeah. Okay. Can they do training? Question mark. I think the answer to that is yes. They can do training while being furloughed. Okay. I've got another one which is actually coming on my phone. Okay. If there is a member of staff on the payroll but who is non-UK residents, do they qualify?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
So it's basically.
Yeah, if they're paid through PAYE, and the reason for furloughing is to avoid redundancies because of COVID-19, they qualify.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Okay, I'm just looking. Right, I think if anybody's got it, we've just got about 5 minutes left. If anyone has got any more questions, type them in now, and we'll do our best to just answer them. I'm just going to check my phone email now. Right, I've got no other emailed questions here. Okay, and so yeah, in terms of wrapping up, how do you think, in terms of the clients and business owners you've been speaking to, what's the mood out there at the moment?
What's the mood? I found the last 3 weeks some of the most upsetting of my working life, seeing really good businesses in such distress and really good business owners in distress. And I think last week, that was particularly, I look at this in a 3-week block, because 3 weeks ago I got back from a week's holiday in Italy, funnily enough, and had to self-quarantine. So the first week was particularly difficult, where businesses were really seeing that they were going to hit the wall. There was then hope that came from the job retention scheme when the Chancellor announced it. I think over the last week, it's been really difficult for a lot of business owners who've been affected by this, because they've been trying to get their head around it, work out what's the right thing to do for their business, but also what's the right thing to do for their team, whilst juggling the fact that they're now at home like the rest of us. And for many, you've got the kids and all that other stuff going on. So I think last week was very difficult. This week, I'm seeing people moving on that transition curve a bit. There's still lots of questions, but there's now quite a lot of grief as well from those who've had to, in effect, mothball their businesses. and obviously anxiety about where it'll end up. My business coach, Alan Smith, who you know, Chris, very well, shared a video with me a couple of days ago, which is called it's a 2.5 minute video, and it's called the Stockdale Paradox. And Stockdale is Admiral Stockdale, and he was imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And he said the prisoners that struggled the most were the optimists, because the optimists would go, we'll be out by Easter, and then Easter came and they weren't out, or we'll be out by Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving came and they weren't, etc. And their hopes were dashed every time. Whereas he said that he coped because he's a positive realist, and his view was, this will end, and I will be better for this experience. It's not an experience I've chosen, but I will be better for this experience, and there will be an end to it. I don't know when, but that will happen. And that sustained him through. So I think the business owners that I'm particularly enjoying working with at the moment are those that go, you know what, this is awful, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to revisit my business model, for my staff maybe to get some rest, for me maybe to get some time with the family, but to plan ahead for how we come out of this, so that we are fast out of the blocks. We may have pivoted, new word, we may have pivoted, but we'll come out of it strong. So I think that positive realism is really starting to shine through within the business community that I work within, as difficult as it is for many people, and I respect that as well.
That's great. And sorry, there's 2 more questions. We've got 2 minutes left. Let's try and get these answered quickly. Could I furlough myself as a director of a limited company for 3 weeks and then unfurlough myself for 1 week to complete end of month admin?
Well, there's 2 questions in there, aren't there? Can the sole director of a limited company furlough themselves? Martin Lewis and the CBI and the IOD seem to think so, but as you said, we haven't got a clear position from the government yet, so best to wait. If you can, it depends whether they then apply all the rules of the job retention scheme, in which case you could do that in 3 weeks and then unfurlough, or whether they put some additional conditions in. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that.
Wait and see. Yeah, it's probably on the edge, should we say? But yeah, let's wait and see. So possible, but let's wait and see. Final question, again about paying the wages. If all of my staff are okay to furlough and wait to get the wages backdated when the HMRC funding portal is up and running, is there anything in the meantime that they can claim to bring some money to them? I don't believe that they cannot claim universal credit while being furloughed.
I don't think they can, because they're still getting their wages. It would only be if the 80% brought them. So maybe for those on minimum wage, and part-time, the reduction to 80% might make them eligible.
Yeah, I would just add that it might be possible, as the employer could just advance, wages, even if it's only, a small amount, not the full month's wage, but it's possible to advance wages to your employees and then deduct them as part of the payroll cycle. Okay, time's pretty much up. So yeah, just the final slide, keep smiling. So yeah, this is my house in Edinburgh. This is something my daughter did. So there's lots of these popping around the area, lots of rainbows and messages in the window. Yeah, so yeah, the last couple of weeks has probably been the hardest I've ever had, most difficult as a business owner, but we're still here, we're still fighting. At One Accounting, we're here to support you, obviously with your accounting needs, but we can also help with cash flow advice as well. And when we get back to normal, we can help you develop a plan to come out fighting and make sure that your business survives this the COVID-19 virus. So myself and Ian, our email address is there. You can contact me on LinkedIn as well. So it's Chris Thomas. You better search and get my details. But we'll leave it there. Like I say, I'll do my best to get these slides out to everyone. But thanks to Ian. And
it was our pleasure, I said.
Good stuff. Thanks, Ian. Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and have a good day. Bye for now.
Cheers, everybody.